So happy Friday again. Today, okay, so we are talking about oxygen and mental health. So, that relationship between what we all know oxygen is what we breathe, what helps us live. But do you really know the impact of what oxygen has on your mental health? And also where you're losing oxygen that we don't really realize that we're losing oxygen or just depleted. So, this is a very expansive conversation today. So, I just want to give you a heads up. I may not be able to cover everything, but I'm going to kind of talk about three different things, what I call the three S's within my, mental health, addiction, recovery realm of what I typically talk with my clients about. And then again, if you have any questions or you're open, whether it's about the topic or you have any other questions, good morning. Then yeah, please feel free to put them in the chat. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. I'm excited about this one. I actually, so this was, I don't really have a select way of identifying what I'm going to talk about each week. I just kind of see what the trend is in my sessions, in my, whatever communication I have with people. And I got this particular idea when I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about sickle cell. And I wanted to actually just look up real quick the sickle cell is a disease of the red blood cell that it has an abnormality to it, which is really common within marginalized populations, specifically the Black community, that I don't think people quite realize the impact of how that actually looks from a mental health perspective and just when it comes to oxygen. So I got this idea when we were talking about their interaction with someone with sickle cell, and I was like, yeah, I didn't really actually, I talk about oxygen all the time, but this is how we ended up here. But just to kind of give you an idea of what sickle cells is basically the red blood cells and sometimes a small amount of red blood cells, but oftentimes a large amount of red blood cells that do not produce, cannot process oxygen, and they become kind of collapsed. And so, yes, obviously that is a very significant disease to live with. It comes with a lot of chronic pain, which is itself going to be debilitating and impactful for anyone's mental health. But what I wanted y'all to maybe consider is that for someone who deals with sickle cell, they don't have the ability to process as much oxygen within their system. So what kind of impact does that leave for someone like who doesn't have that issue? But where are we actually taking oxygen for granted? Because if you have sickle cell, you're not taking that for granted because you don't have literally the ability to to get in there from red blood cell level and be able to like, okay, cell, you need to expand more and be able to filtrate more oxygen into the blood system. So you often see that coming, that like we said, it come often with pain and chronic pain, but flare-ups are going to cause negative impacts on family systems. And that is quite prevalent since the rate of sickle cell is prevalent in other Black communities, like I was saying. That is an influence to any type of consideration for someone in the helping profession of behaviorally what kind of issues you're going to have to deal with from a mental health perspective, because a person's physical capability to process information is going to be why am I stumbling with my words today? Is going to be compromised because they are experiencing pain. They're not physically, their body's not physically able to have that oxygen. So your brain at that point is going to be compromised in how people just obtain and retain information. So I wanted to kind of open this conversation up just a little bit more and talk generally about like what areas, if you do not struggle with sickle cell, right? If you are not someone who has to deal with that, be thankful. I know I'm thankful, but I also have to look at where do we lose oxygen in other areas of our life. So I'm going to go over what we call the three S's, or what I call the three S's. I tried to look it up to see how common this was, but I talk about these three things when it comes to stressors, more or less, and what causes addiction, right? As a heads up for anyone watching this who is not comfortable talking about this, or a parent that doesn't want their child to particularly hear me talk about sex, it is going to be mentioned today. That is one of the S's. It's something significant because there's a positive and a negative to it, but we don't talk about it enough in an open, vulnerable way to really know the impact of what that actually has on mental health. So I'm going to do my best to kind of cover what I can just generally in this live today and see how it goes. All right, so let's talk about the three S's. The three S's: stress, substances, and sex. Now, there are plenty of other S's that can go into this, but I'm going to start with those three because they tend to be where we have natural kind of automatic processes that we're not paying attention to that ultimately lead into the bigger problem of when we have mental health issues. So I'm also getting over COVID still, so this talking thing, I hopefully will not cough that much. So maybe I'll slow down a little bit. All right, so let's start with stress. We talk often a lot about stress. There's a lot of different, stressors that we have externally. But when we're talking about oxygen, we don't necessarily realize sometimes that we become our own stress-producing environment, because when we get stressed or we get startled in some way, what do? We hold our breath. There's a lot of people, we do one of two things. We either hold our breath or we breathe too much, hyperventilation. And when we hyperventilate, there's a lot of people, you're basically breathing too much. You're getting almost too much, excuse me, air. That was weird. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this very easily today. We get too much air in our system that our body is not able to actually really process all of it. So we're not actually getting enough oxygen because we're hyperventilating. We're just going, and we're not actually retaining any of the oxygen within our bodies. So that's where a lot of people, the whole paper bag thing about to help people hyperventilate is actually mostly a mindfulness grounding technique. If you think about it, because paper bag is crinkly, you're going to hear it. You can see the oxygen and how fast you're breathing. So it activates your senses more than it does anything to filter air, to give you more oxygen. It actually is supposed to help you slow your breathing down to a rate that is more appropriate for your body to process and pull oxygen into its cell from a cellular level. So if you put this on a micro, like I'm going to talk about three different levels of life. We've got micro, meso, and macro. From a micro level, we're talking about just breath holding. Excuse me. Something I'm honestly modeling for you inappropriately right now is how fast I'm talking and not allowing myself to slow down and make sure I breathe in between. My lungs, since I've had COVID for the 2 weeks ago, and I'm in recovery mode from a physical standpoint now, that my breathing has now become a little bit more restricted, because if I take in these big deep breaths, my lungs were compromised by the virus and I cough so much. So when we're busy coughing, what slowly happens over time is that our lungs basically start to not inflate as much, and therefore it causes us to cough even more when we try to use more oxygen and breathe more in, as I'm trying to hold back a cough right now. What better way to teach y'all as I'm literally going through myself? So that's where, if you go back and watch my video from last week, COVID has, not only changed our lives from a social level, from an emotional level, because it stressed us the F out, but from a physical level, if you've gotten COVID, or if you've even gotten any kind of respiratory virus of some sort, or infection of some sort, this is what happens to you from a physiological level, is that your lungs are not able to really expand as much, because you have to retrain them to now be able to expand more and to be able to have your body get the chance to pull that oxygen into the red blood cell and be able to move it throughout the body. appropriately. So what happens from a when we start just getting little degrees of stress, what we do automatically in our regular day, our respiratory system, our circulatory system, the things that go on autopilot that we don't tell ourselves to do. We don't say, heart, you need to beat, heart, you need to beat. That if you have any kind of malfunction or a genetic issue that causes a deficit within one of those systems, you can have just naturally, you're not taking more oxygen in. What happens over a long period of time with very small increments of oxygen missing now from your body is that your systems start to dysregulate. Your systems, like, you don't even have to be stressed out at this point, you or deal with a stressor of life. It's just the matter of, like, your body is not getting enough oxygen and energy in it from a just an oxygen standpoint, that your brain now becomes compromised. And what happens when we actually go into low energy is that our body goes on alert. So we actually looks like it can speed up. That's why hyperventilation can happen sometimes, is that we go into survival response mode, and our body is like, we get anxious, and what we process as an emotion of being anxious, we also attach to it as an identity, but our body is just like, yo, I'm being robbed of oxygen here. So it's like, let me try to get you to pay attention. So being anxious so I can get more. And then hyperventilation is kind of an unnatural result. And we're not prepared or even know about why it's important to regulate your breathing at that point. I hope that's making sense for people, right? So it can come from just a stressor of having a medical condition when you're born with one, or if you've never had any issues and you're new to mental health and you have a stressor that comes along in life, like a breakup. You have education. If you go to the traditional educational programs, they're going to stress you out. So if you have any of this degree of stress and you're a breath holder, because I'm a breath holder, I don't know, listen, when I get going and my mind is ruminating, I just start to, like, I can stare at a wall and my breathing slows, but it doesn't slow to the point that's going to be helpful for me. It's actually slowing down to a point where I'm not breathing, and then I have to, like, oh shit. That's what stress can do to you. I know I don't want to say I'm stressed out. I've gotten better with my stress, but what happens over time is that if I do not practice that mindfulness, and why I teach people the recovery lifestyle and bringing mindfulness in throughout your day, is that you can start to tell when it is that you've been kind of overlooking your respiratory regulation. And this is where breath training, I do a lot of breath training with people. So then that way you have a mindfulness to the amount of oxygen that you're actually taking in throughout the day, and that you don't actually become the trigger for your own stress. Because physically you can become the stressor. You can be on vacation, and if you feel anxious and you're like, why am I anxious? I'm on vacation. I know I may be thinking about those things. As soon as you're thinking about something, you become potentially your own trigger. And then that's where, if you're breathing, if you're not trained to know, like, okay, how do I regulate this? Insert breathing technique, which all of that information you guys can find on my website or my app. Excuse me. That you slowly start to lose micro bits of oxygen that your body now responds to as anxiety, and you become an anxious and stressed person. So the secondary representation of stress from like a little bit higher level, this is where trauma comes in. Now you'll be like, Sarah, like, we're all traumatized. Yeah, I thank you for recognizing that. We've all been traumatized. COVID in itself was a trauma for people. It's a significant dysregulating event that can cause change. That's all trauma is, right? It doesn't have to be being in an abusive situation. It doesn't have to be losing your own home. It doesn't have to be being, attacked by anyone. And I apologize if that is a stressor for anyone to even hear. But trauma, like, from a micro level, we're already dealing with a lower level of oxygen if we're just dealing with stress. Then if a trauma happens, or if a trauma has happened, that's another reason why we can feel that stress. That depletes the amount of oxygen that we have because it's a complete dysregulating experience. All right, I gotta take a break because I'm losing oxygen. How do you get oxygen back in your body? Water is one way. I feel like every time I go through these points, and I don't want to do like a whole, I really try to be respectful of y'all's attention and not doing more than, 40 minutes of just lecturing about these things. But that just reminded me of like, if you're not drinking water, most mental health, like in general, that it comes from people being hungry and dehydrated because our relationship with food is really messed up. That's another topic for another time. It's actually like why I can't tell you my coaching program is you can do in 3 months. You can't do this. You can create change in 3 months, but it's not going to be sustainable because you have not corrected the root system of that change. It is built on all of this lack of awareness of how your body works and how your relationships and attachments to certain changes aren't sustainable, and how you deal with stress. Because when stress happens again, that's why most people can't be consistent and they get knocked off, is because a life event happens and they lose their routine and they do not know how to grieve and deal with that stress. So back to the topic at hand, though, is oxygen. Why is oxygen so important? Well, it gives you energy. Oxygen is what allows your blood cells to move around in your body. It's what allows your brain to function. It's what allows all of your automatic, your nervous system, your all the different systems in your body to operate on autopilot. So when you start robbing yourself from that oxygen, you start being the autopilot starts to malfunction. And that's where it can get even worse. And where therapy comes in is to retrain you and hold you accountable to start paying attention to those things. And you can start breathing a little bit more intentionally. That was actually intentional. So how do you regulate your breath? So you guys can go to my website. You can go to my Instagram accounts. I have a specific box breathing technique that I have pinned everywhere, because all you have to do is actually, you have to challenge the behavior that you're doing, and you got to do the opposite. So if you're like, Sarah, I need more oxygen, you actually have to hold your breath for a couple of seconds to really reinforce and kind of break your attention away from getting off of that dysfunctional autopilot and getting into an intentional state of breathing regulation again. So when you hold your breath, like I just did, and you slow your exhale, not only do you start becoming more mindful, but you're also taking control back over the dysregulation and you're getting more regulated. So that's where holding your breath is actually the answer to being robbed of the oxygen in the breath that you have. Isn't that weird, right? Like, I love it because we've been told that opposites attract, but we didn't realize it was not necessarily in dating. It's actually within yourself. When you're starting over, you have to do the things that don't make sense. You have to do the things that don't really, I'm not saying like risk your life and do, crazy like stuff that doesn't make sense fundamentally. It's just, you have to do the things that you don't necessarily want to do, but you need to do. You got to refocus on the foundation of how you become more sustainable, is knowing how to regulate and build health back into your life. So still on stress, why is stress and where does oxygen start to deplete from a macro level? Think about something like pollution. So this is where being environmentally sound, you don't have to be like, full recycle all this stuff and, save the earth 100%, but you have to be aware of what impact you have on the environment, because the environment has an impact on you. So where do we get most of our oxygen from? The general air that we breathe. What is going to be a restrictive factor in the air that we breathe, that we naturally have access to? Pollution. Pollution is probably the biggest issue that a lot of people don't realize from a macro level, that where we start to reduce the amount of oxygen that we're actually able to take in. Now, again, just saying real quick is that this is not taking into account anybody's, like, if you were born with any kind of deficit, has to still be tailored to you. And we have to consider that, but I'm just kind of pointing out some main indicators on each different level that you don't have any control over the overall pollution of the world, but you do have some impact on how you contribute to the pollution. Whether it's for generations to come, but then also this generation. So now some of the more obvious ones that you do have control over where oxygen is being depleted from a stress level, smoking. Smoking, smoking, smoking. I understand for generations we heard smoking's bad. Smoking is an addiction because it's also going to allude to the second S, which is substance. It is not just, you smoking a, tobacco leaf anymore. There are carcinogens, there are added substances within a cigarette or even in marijuana these days, any kind of drug, honestly, and you can smoke a plant. There is going to be, when you put fire to something, it creates smoke. That's just the natural carbon dioxide that's released back into the atmosphere because you're taking the oxygen molecule out because it is combustible, and it will burn that. So when you smoke, you are naturally putting stress on your body, and you're reducing the amount of oxygen that you're taking in that way. Given that I grew up in a smoker's household, this is not something, like, it's not just so easy to stop, but it's something that if you're talking about how you can look and make your generation and your legacy what it looks like moving forward, one thing that you can do to set a very new course in life is just to stop smoking inside. I would say stop smoking in general, but if you're smoking inside, don't leave yourself trapped in that without any kind of ventilation, because you are slowly causing yourself a mental health issue, and that can lead to anxiety, depression, and something worse, which is all you're able to recover from. But if you don't have to go down that route, let's not go down that route. You don't want to have behavioral, like, we don't have to make it any more difficult than it needs to be. So one tangible thing that you can do is you figure out a plan for you to stop smoking. Maybe it stops smoking inside first. You start smoking outside. It makes the behavior of smoking less desirable because now you go, excuse me, you have to go outside. And yeah, that's how you can break a habit real quick. Actually, probably not real quick. It takes a little bit of time. But so let's talk a little bit more about substances. So we talked about, like, just, nicotine. So that binding component, that's where your brain starts to be like, ooh, I really like this. This decreases my stress. So, but not only, it does not decrease your stress, it distracts you from it, but it also reinforces chemically from all your hormones that you get dopamine every time that you reduce your stress momentarily. So if we talk about another substance, so marijuana is, again, kind of falls into that smoking category. It can do the same thing and bring that euphoria, release that dopamine. It can help in controlled dosages. Y'all hear me when I say this, because I am cannabis friendly, but I am not pro, like, all cannabis all day. It is a healing principle, but it requires a lot of structure and monitoring of it for you to actually get any positive things out of it. It can lead to psychiatric issues because if you think about it, not only just the impact of the brain and the oxygen that we're talking about if you smoke it, but it is a psychoactive medication. So it does take away limits. It can help a lot with, creative flow and everything. But it also, while it's helping with this, it's causing a problem at the same time if you do not know how to regulate your biochemistry without and monitor stress. If that's your only stress management technique because you've been under a lot of stress just generationally, and you've dealt with your own traumas, it can be helpful, but it is only short term, and it's causing a secondary problem without your attention to it, because guess what? You're high. As someone who has been a smoker of cannabis before, it is not always a safe, it's not the safest thing. It can be beneficial, but you have to be very, very careful with it. Very careful. Alcohol, what that does from an oxygen standpoint is that it is a central nervous system depressant. So it actually can um, slow your breathing to, especially depending on how much you drink, you can slow your breathing if you have any kind of regurgitation. So you get sick and then you don't have the enough oxygen to be able to like actually express. So that's where a lot of people, if you know they're drunk, please turn them over so they don't choke on their own vomit, right? Like if you know you can't, I can't prevent you from doing any of these things, but I'm going to give you the information to help you make an informed decision. And you know, when we're drinking alcohol, you're slowing your body down to a point where those automatic systems, again, like your respiratory system, your circulatory system, are going to be impacted. And that's one thing. If you have a multitude of other issues going on from a medical standpoint or a physical standpoint, then you don't have any control over that anymore. By putting this one substance just one time, it's not just a matter of like, oh, drunk driving and you could hurt someone. You could be drinking and not know your own biochemistry and be restricting your alcohol. I'm sorry, not restricting your alcohol, restricting your oxygen processing ability with one moment. And then long term, like if you are a frequent drinker, you drink every day, you're doing that every day. That adds up. That adds up. You have lesser oxygen within your body. Your brain is going to start to not be able to function correctly. It's going to like help because short-term gratification, alcohol helps you feel better and get distracted from it. But all the shakes, the DTs, all the things, the withdrawal symptoms, severe dehydration usually. If you start to look at how, I'm not saying go chug the water, but you have to rebalance because you have more alcohol in your system than you do natural nutrients and things that your body needs to be able to function and regulate and rebalance on its own. We are a self-healing thing. Our body can heal itself. That's why we get wounds. And if you don't have wounds that are healing quickly, it's probably because your body does not have what it needs from a nutrient standpoint or an oxygen standpoint to be able to generate that energy from a cellular level to help with that healing. But we heal on our own. We're like Wolverine. That comic book does not exist because, you know, it's out of this world. It literally is describing the body's natural ability to heal itself. He just does it at an exponential speed and becomes a superhero to be able to do it. But we're all a Wolverine. We can all heal. Now, unless you have some kind of genetic issue that restricts you from that, which is possible. I don't know the names of it because I'm not a doctor, and I'm talking generally about the experience of these things that exist and the impact they have on us in our life and our mental health. But this is what is going on and what can be happening to you if you're using substances. So most of the other substances that are out there when we're looking at PCP, your hallucinogenics, your psychedelics, and psychedelics, hallucinogenics, your benzodiazepines, they're all altering the state of how your body functions. So just think, if you are smoking anything, kind of goes into the smoking category, is that fire is you're inhaling carbon monoxide more than you are oxygen. And so then that's also a secondary consequences of just getting, you know, high and what the substance is actually doing to the brain and the body. So let's talk about the last one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is sex. So this kind of is not quite the substance topic that we were just talking about, but can be. There's a part of sex that is where we talk about an addiction and why oxygen is so important, is that it kind of goes back to the first two, actually, not just substances, but when it's a degree of stress. In a lot of ways, sex is a positive stress, but it's also cardiovascular exercise. So if you do not have a breathing regulation that goes along with your physical movement, so the positive aspects of sexual activity, then you actually can be doing that whole breath holding or hyperventilating to the point where it actually can cause you more mental health issues, which is also a predeterminant for it becoming more easily addicted to it, because now it's a substance issue. Your body is actually responding to the endorphins, the dopamine, the serotonin, all of the good, happy feeling chemicals that are released when you're doing this one act that I'm not shaming it, because sex is a natural part of our existence. It's how I'm here, able to be in talking to you. We wouldn't exist without it. But we've been so misinformed and miseducated, undereducated about what happens from a biological level, a emotional level, and and a psychological level from that mental standpoint, and a spiritual level, because there is a spiritual component to it. And but again, that I remember these conversations can get very expansive. But why sex becomes a topic of oxygen is because it's aerobic exercise. And if you're, this is an aerobic exercise for me pretty much right now, with trying to regulate my breathing and just being able to make sure that I don't basically start sweating. So that's where stress, if y'all ever had like, I don't think I have, but I get pit stains a lot easy. But that's also because my stress levels are super high sometimes. And so when your body's under duress, I can act, I look super confident talking about it, but I could be super anxious and talking faster and faster because I do not have enough oxygen in my body, unless I'm like, let me remember slowing down, talking a little bit slower, breathing in between my words a little bit more. I'm not going to forget what I said. That's why I write things down. It doesn't feel natural. It feels more impressive if I could remember everything. And I don't have to hold all this information in my head, but when I write it down, I actually allow myself less stress so I can do more. I don't sweat as much. If it's a new situation, better believe, back of my neck, I got pit stains for days. You should see my first um speaking engagement. Like, I think it was in February. I went and spoke in front of I totally got off on a tangent as we were talking about it. But one of my first speaking engagements, I was in front of a class of probably like 15, 16 people. And I had 2 layers on. I sweat through both layers, not because I was dealing with stress. I wasn't, substance wise, I probably did have too much caffeine that day. So I'm dealing with something that like sped me up, which is going to dysregulate my breathing. And then that's also going to put a compromisation on how much oxygen that I'm actually taking in, because I'm so keyed up because I was nervous on top of that. And then your body, that's what part of your body, like your body heats up, it's going to sweat because it's like you're generating too much heat that it needs to let it off. So you're one big pressure cooker, if y'all think about it that way. And what happens when you actually use a pressure cooker is that it takes the oxygen out. Oh, well, actually, it keeps oxygen in, but it puts the food that you're cooking under an immense amount of pressure and heats it up and cooks it. And, that's significant. There's not that much oxygen in there. So when you actually have more oxygen in there, the heat can circulate a little bit more. And if I'm talking about this as a representation of your body, if you are, and then you don't trigger as many of your insecurities, you don't, yeah. I'm pretty sure y'all can see how this all interconnects, and it gets really overwhelming real quickly. So take a moment, breathe with it, because the reason I'm talking about these things is to give you an understanding and one perspective how I work with my clients about what's going on with you, so you can figure out and de-escalate. Everyone's going to have a different place where they need to start, but to take this information as a way of as a coping skill. This is where we can't always intellectualize our feelings, but a lot of the times we feel anxious because we don't know enough about why something happened to us or why something is happening. And a lot of the times I get to go research random stuff all the time to give people insight about what's going on with them. So that's why I want to talk a little bit about, like, a lot of people we know, like, okay, we have to breathe oxygen, but we don't necessarily know how significant and where in our life is our oxygen actually being taken from us. And it's willingly. Y'all aren't breathing. I'm not breathing. And if I don't stop and actually do that, I'm causing myself more stress in the long run, and it's no one else's fault. Doesn't matter what's been done to me in life. I'm causing my own problem if I don't stop and do anything about it, or I don't ask for help somewhere, right? So when we take a look, I'm going to kind of segue back to this whole, sex thing. It really was more about sex can be a very underestimated place, can be good workout, but it also can be a very underestimated place where we're losing oxygen because it is a combination of stress, especially if you're not having sex with the right person because they cause you stress and they do not allow a sexual experience that to be pleasurable the way that it's supposed to be. And it's also a substance. It's in a way. Let me rephrase that. It is a substance. It releases a substance in you that can create an addictive pattern, and because of release of hormones, but it is considered a process addiction because it's something that we naturally do that can become compulsive and obsessive. So, those are your three S's of where oxygen and mental health align. So, I want you guys to consider how do these things like where I would say everyone, and if you deny me of this, that everyone is in the category of like you're losing oxygen when it comes to stress. Because if you're living in 2023 in America, whether you're especially if you're black or brown, I'm just going to say that you're stressed. And to underestimate that would be clearly a big disadvantage over how it is that you are addressing your health. You're minimizing your stress levels. I know if I can do it, there's other people out here that are minimizing their stress levels. Be careful not to maximize your stress levels because then you become reactive to your own stress and you actually lose energy in general because you're going to be ruminating. And this is where therapy can really help to kind of put that dealing with stress and the stress that happens in life, putting it a little at more ease for you. So then that way you have a better chance of being able to cope with it and you can build a resilience to the stress that we have to go through in life. Life is stressful, but it's not supposed to be that stressful. Okay. So yeah, I want you guys to consider where do you fall in like what you're dealing with how you're losing oxygen. Is it just the breathing dysregulation? For me, I can find a way where I'm activating all three of these S's in my life. So therefore, I could be causing my own stress in some way, shape, or form. Just, or at least in my history, I've activated all three of them. During a life of chaos, we tend to see all of these three things really be the cultivation of a lot of people's like operating in survival mode and trauma responses. So when you take one of these components away, it can have a really big impact positively on your mental health if you're prepared to see how it makes sense in your life. So I hope this information helped you guys. I really hope, if you consider, if you see this video and you take it into a therapy with your therapist and consider how that makes sense and work with your therapist to be able to see how it really affects your life, then in that way they can help you make sense of what I'm just kind of giving you generally. I hope it made sense. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. Please DM me if you want me to expand on anything else. But those are just the three ways that we I could even go into like changing one of the S's out into sickness, but I kind of covered that on stress. Is that sickness is stressful. It puts the body under stress because you're dealing with that. But yeah, really consider where your oxygen and trying to figure out how do you get back? Oh, here's a component I forgot to write notes on. How do you get oxygen back into your life? First and foremost, practicing breathing techniques. I told y'all a little bit earlier in the beginning. You can find it on my app. You can find it on my Instagram. You can DM me. I can send you a link for free. You don't have to pay for any of this. Like, I want y'all to start breathing better because I know I can struggle with my own breath work, but you don't have to struggle anymore. It's one way where you can start bringing more oxygen into your life over the course. You can start today. You can start anytime. Just taking a quick break, go. So now that I've got that control back a little bit more, I'm going to do a couple more of those holds at the top. And then you can start, your body is like, oh, we can calm down. In through the nose, hold, exhale through the mouth. Okay. Other ways that you can get oxygen into it is start doing small aerobic activity that is not like super stressful. and it's, you can regulate, you can practice that breathing, stopping smoking, whatever you're smoking. If you smoke weed, start doing more edibles. If you're smoking crack, I don't want to go down this road, but just stop smoking. Like, that's one way that you can do. I'm not condoning any other drug use, but to take a harm reduction approach, you can stop doing the one thing that causes the most damage and do something that causes a little bit less damage. Okay. Then once you get to that point, you're like, oh, okay, I don't really want to do this anymore. It's not serving me as much. It's not as fun. You don't have to go back and do the most harmful thing. You can just go ahead and get off of it. Life does make sense when in a state of sobriety. You can still have fun. It will take a while to get to learn how to rebuild that fun in life and around new change, but you're working against the natural course of things when you're delaying your own development. You're causing your own stress in that way. So going with the flow, letting life change around you and dealing with the discomfort that comes with life is another way that you can get more oxygen in your life, because we're going to help you in therapy. We're going to help you breathe. We're going to help you calm down. We're going to help open up those different areas of your life to be able to breathe a little bit more freely, because you're not going to be as stressed. And you don't even have to quit your shitty job. That's all just things that you can do. Those things do and may need to happen, because it's stressful to be in certain places that you don't necessarily connect with. But if you're able to maintain that and maybe work on the thing that goes with you to any job, and that any job can cause you stress, we go to the job. I had to really be honest with myself here, because I used to jump jobs often in the beginning of my career. The first 10 years of my career, I had 4 or 5 different places. I stayed there for about a year and a half. And for me, it was a lack of oxygen was a component of it, because I was dealing with an attention deficit disorder, and I was trying to change my environment to make myself feel better, because I had this feeling of not being satisfied, of being anxious. And I had it was negativity for me. And it wasn't until I forced myself to stay and doing something uncomfortable, I did change a lot. And I realized, it's yo, this is not getting any better. I keep leaving. I have a little short period time of relief, but then I keep getting stressed out again. Why? Oh, because I'm the person that's coming with me in all of these different environments. I would go travel, and I'm like, oh, I don't have to go back to my job. I have to do this. Something's got to change. Well, it changed when I did. I don't go on as many vacations as I used to, and I'm still happier. I still need vacation, don't get me wrong, but it's a backwards. We come into this world literally turned around. We're not taught how to redirect it to a place. Some of us were taught. If you did have, parents teaching you emotional intelligence, if you did have the education that I'm teaching, whoever finds this now, then be grateful. But that doesn't mean that you know everything. There's plenty of things that can keep you stuck and limit your ability and your insight to understand how to operate in the world. I'm getting off on a tangent again. So I am going to leave this here. I hope this was helpful. Try to open up your ability to get oxygen back into your life and understand the impact that it has on your mental health. And it's maybe hopefully one thing that you can try today and be intentional with today is making sure that you bring more oxygen into your life, and money will follow as well. So I hope you guys have a good week, a good weekend, and I will see you guys next Friday.